Hi, and welcome to my forecast and predictive presentation on United Airlines. My forecast analysis is based on expenses. United Airlines has kind of had a sporadic relationship with their expenses from year to year. As you can see in the bottom chart, they've got more peaks on the expenses being higher than the prior year than they do have divots. And it's also reflected in the top chart. The lighter blue does kind of ride over the darker blue for the most part. With the 2019 COVID pandemic striking and costing the airline industry so much money, United Airlines had to make some kind of adjustment in order to remain competitive and afloat during their massive cut in revenue, and operating expenses was one that they decided to make a huge shift on, cutting over 37,400 jobs, and which kind of actually shows off in the drop in 2020 when they did their huge layoff. So, the forecast does show that, they haven't had the best relationship with operating expenses, and it's not forecasted for the airline industry to kind of spike back up for another, I believe, a few years, with it being 2024 being the earliest year possible. So it'll be important for them to work on their operating expense relationship. Continuing forward with the risk avoidance, it kind of goes back to their expense ratio. In 2020, they have the worst expense ratio since around 1990. So with the red line, it kind of took the expense ratio and it kind of like overlays it on what every other year would have looked like had they had this expense ratio then. And it really showcases how a massive amount of revenue is currently being eaten up by expenses. It also shows that if we were to leave the expense ratio as is and don't do anything to change it, when we get back to peak season, potentially in 2024, it will continue to eat a very large margin of our revenue. So it'll be essential that some action is being done to ensure that it is being brought back down. Total quality control and the Deming's 14 points are great solutions to implement management structures to ensure that quality is being driven at all layers, and efficiency is driven at all layers of the business. In this instance, the layers have been shifted to be more focused towards reducing route costs via route efficiencies. And then it kind of transcends down via the 14 points, with the final one being route deployment. Followed in with a TQC diagram, kind of showcasing a little bit more in action the last thought pattern. Asset management essentially will generate requirements. Those requirements would become a potential route, a measurement, the review process, and then potentially an adaptation of the original plan will be put in place to essentially ensure that it's ready to go, or it would be beneficial and or profitable to the organization in some fashion. Followed into with identifying the leadership and the management responsibilities. Lastly, into fuel costs and fuel and cost management. it should be highlighted that in the measure, review, and adapt stage, that there would be a cost analysis stage already done to identify and ensure, or maybe not ensure, but to forecast out and plan for a profitable situation. The fuel and cost management is more just to pop in and to, I guess, discertain and or focus on current costs, I suppose. Follow back into potential route at this point. If everything finally checks out, or what do you call it? The assets have been assigned, then at that point it would be shifted out to a route. And then at that point, we fall kind of back into the circle again. But at this point, when it hits to the measure, the review, and the adapt stage, we now actually have route utilization data to determine whether or not the route has been beneficial and is, hitting the marks we want. And at which point we can fall back to management responsibilities, whether or not we feel we need to shift things and or we need to reduce. And then the fuel and cost management, again, to kind of, I guess, again, dictate out what currently is hitting us. And then lastly, do we continue the route? So it's going to be a constant cycle. Six Sigma is a great management solution that provides a methodology of tools that are based around 5 points to drive quality and efficiencies within an organization. In this instance, these 5 points are more shifted around the route efficiencies again. So the first thing is being focused on a topic, and in this case, identifying route potential cost savings. How do we do that? We got to measure efficiencies. What do we do with the measurements? We then analyze them to see where we can find bottlenecks or issues. Once we've found them, how do we improve them and how do we get around them? And then once we've implemented those, at that point, we've hit a point of control because we have identified, we've measured, we've analyzed, and we've found ways around the issues that we've identified. But once we've identified one issue, that doesn't mean we're done. And it's a constant cycle of working through those 5 points to constantly push and drive a product to higher efficiencies. Implementing a process that kind of falls back. The points pointed below or beforehand would be to the initial point with the asset management. So we'd be gathering the requirements. In this case, they're titled parameters. These ones are more focused on the cost side, so capacity, expected fuel, and asset requirements. But one thing with cost is something to keep in mind is what's the goal of the project? If the goal is to potentially maybe hit a new market, is the goal to hit profitability initially, or is the goal to hit a certain market share initially? So sometimes it shouldn't always be looked at from a revenue standpoint as to whether or not a process is worthwhile or worthy of an investment. Rather, what is the impact it might have on the organization or company? So once you have your parameters, you then can go in and potentially do cost forecast and an asset analysis. Determine, do you have the assets available, or is there another form of asset that you have that might be able to meet the need? Do you need to obtain any assets? What additional costs might you be going against? And then once you have all that, what is the potential end cost of the solution, in this case, the route? Followed in with the revenue forecast to kind of get an idea of what money you might save utilizing maybe this new route, or what money we might make by deploying this new route. And then finally, does that revenue offset the costs in a great enough point to then assign assets? And if so, do we have the assets to assign? Do we need to ship them from another route, or do we need to procure them? And then once all the assets are available and the training has been deployed out, so that people are aware of the new route and or the updated route that we're about to deploy, and everything's ready to go, then we can actually hit route deployment. This has been my presentation. Thank you. Have a great day.